as a wise man once said, facts don't care about your feelings. And I will say that the argument against free will, in my view, is based upon something broader than just scientific analysis or empirical research. Rather, we can build an argument, I think, from a law of logic, the proposition that P must either be true or false, and it can't be both, it can't be neither. It has to be one or the other. Now, this law of the excluded middle, one of the foundational precepts of philosophy, we can simply ask a question of any kind of mental activity, and this will be regardless of whether it's material or immaterial. That's what makes this a crucial argument, and an important one, a pertinent one, is that you can ask of that mental activity, is it determined or is it not? That is it determined by anything else, or is it completely undetermined by anything? If it's undetermined by anything, then it's random, and you're by definition not in control of that which is random. If it's determined by something, then it's either determined by something further inside your mind, or inside your brain, or indeed inside your soul, or it's determined by something external to your brain. If it's determined by something external to yourself, I should say yourself rather than your brain here to rid this conversation of any implicit materialism, exterior to yourself, if that's what's determining the action, then clearly you're not in ultimate control of that action. If it's something inside of yourself somewhere, then all you do is push the problem back and you ask the question again, is that thing determined or is it indeterminate? So indeterminate, it's random. Determined, you keep going back until you either terminate in something outside of the self, something, or I suppose something undetermined and therefore random, either of which you are completely out of control in. If you say that it terminates in something like a soul, people like to do this. They say, well, look, with a religious philosophy, we have the benefit of introducing a soul. That doesn't solve anything. Because you still need to, it's not a matter of having to explain the mechanism by which the soul brings about actions. That may well be a mystery. But if it is the case that whatever it is that's doing that is either determined or it's not, and that if it's not, it's random and therefore out of your control, and that if it is, it ultimately terminates in something outside of yourself or something random, and both of which are out of your control, free will cannot exist.
Well,
and so I would be careful.
That argument does rely on the complete deconstruction of the self. Right? I mean, you're using the term self in this argument in, I think, a couple of different ways. You're saying something outside yourself, but then you're breaking down the self into a bunch of separate components as though the self is a computer. Right? As though if you took the self and you broke it down into a machine, and there's like there's the microchip, and you've got the processor, you've got all these different parts of it. So it has to be coming from here, or it has to be coming from here. But I think the very idea that we have of ourselves as selves is as a deciding being. And so the attempt to carve that down into, so which parts of the deciding being, that is an avoidance strategy. So I don't think that the argument quite holds.
Well, if we can call the self just a deciding being,
call it a deciding being,
then that sort of fundamental assumption that we make about the nature of the self, I don't think is going to be incompatible with atheism.
How so?
Because we're talking about what the self is here. I mean, atheists believe in the self. Everybody believes in the self.
Well, no, that's not. I mean, that I find difficult to believe. Why would an atheist believe in the self? The self is a series of non-deciding mechanisms, as you've described. I see that your view of the self is an atheist view of the self, a meatball wandering through space, as I've put it somewhat colorfully, the sort of Spinoza idea that you're a stone that's been thrown, and you can comprehend that you've been thrown, but you're a stone that's been thrown, and that's just the way that it is. Why would there be in atheist philosophy such a thing as a deciding self? The deciding self, the deciding being, is external to the idea of an evolutionary cause, because the very word deciding suggests uncaused decision-making, and you've just excluded it through your own philosophy.
Uncaused decision-making, I suppose, is a concept that I think is unintelligible, and therefore, if there is an unintelligibility of the self on atheism, I suppose the thrust of the criticism that I made to essentially every point you made in that video, except for the argument from motion, is that what you're saying to me, if it applies to atheism, I think simultaneously applies to theism as well.
How so?
An uncaused decision. I mean, what is the process by which a decision is made?
But now you're falling into the same sort of argument that I excluded at the beginning, which was, I said that the beauty of religion is that there's a bunch of stuff I don't understand. So I can't explain to you how the uncaused self makes decisions.
Well, then I can't explain to you how the uncaused self exists on an atheistic
But you have
framework.
a burden and I don't. Meaning that
I don't think that's the case.
You do, though. I mean, the simple fact is that you are the one who's claiming that a reasonable materialist universe is the cause of all. And so if that's the case, you do have to explain the mechanism in a way that I certainly do not. My entire philosophy rests on the positing of an entire realm of things I don't understand in terms of their interaction with the world. Now, as I said at the very beginning, that leaves me a giant escape hatch. I'm not going to pretend that that's not a giant escape hatch. It acts in practice as a giant escape hatch. It also tends to act as a fundamental principle of faith, right? Again.
All right. Maybe that's good enough for now. I know this clip has been circulating quite a bit on social media, at least in my feed. Definitely got caught up in the algorithm on that one. I thought this was awesome. I I just did a video on Alex. I don't know Alex, but I've kind of started watching some more of his content. Of course, I don't know either one of these people personally. Somewhat familiar with Ben Shapiro's content. I used to watch it maybe many years ago, but not any time recently. Um, this one is so interesting because I think the common person would say, obviously, you have free will. I could get up right now and choose not to record this video. I could choose to stay here. That's my choice. It's my choice. Alex put forth a an interesting argument. I try to take down some notes just so as I'm learning here and trying to unpack it as well. But basically, any decision that you make, let's just examine. Think about a decision you're trying to make right now. You're choosing to either watch this or not watch it. Stay and watch. It's your free will, but stay and watch. Um, but any decision that you would want to make, it's either determined or undetermined, I think is what he said. I wrote those down. If it's undetermined, if it's undetermined, then there's really no other mechanism causing you to make that choice or decision. Therefore, it's random. If it's random, it's not your choosing. So anything in that category, I don't know if he actually believes anything really exists in that category, but just to follow the laws of logic that you kind of can't be P and not P at the same time. So if just to have that as a category, but if there's anything that is undetermined, it's random, it's really not your choice. The determined path would be, is it determined by something external or internal? Anything fundamentally external to yourself would also be outside of your control and not free will. Anything internal, you just keep going back in the process. And his claim is that if you keep going, you keep going, you keep going, you will in fact find nothing that is not external or random, therefore no free will. As I'm considering this, I'm trying to process this argument. And this is why it's so important, and I don't think it was anywhere in this clip or this debate, a true definition of terms. Because to me, when I consider some of these points, it's more like not an argument against free will, it's an argument against the will itself. And I think it's even quoted somewhere, Schopenhauer's like you can choose what you want, but you can't will what you want. Okay. But if I'll define will as the ability, or let's put it this way, your ability to choose. And so if this argument goes to its conclusion, there is no ability for you to choose. Actually, there is no you for you to choose if you define the will as the ability to choose, and if you define you and the your ability to choose as an independent actor. If this is true, there is no such thing as an independent actor, meaning that if we boil it down to either these external factors are basically either biology or environment, biological mechanisms, psychological mechanisms, which are really just things from your history. These are external things put into you, therefore shaping every decision you make, even if it appears to be a biological impulse or a psychological decision, I'm going to go for a walk. It's actually all of these other external factors, um, actually, you could say, compelling you to take take this action. Um, I think a couple of things Alex said there that I'd love for some comments on this to push back on some of these things. The first thing I wrote down is his argument is all against free will. So even if everything I just said is not true, we say there is such a thing as free will, which you might call like an ultimate decider, the entity or the part of you that is in ultimate control. It cannot be random, it cannot be undetermined, and it cannot be determined, even if you follow that to the nth degree. It cannot be either of those, because if it's either of those, then it's not free will as this ultimate decider. That implies, or that definition would imply what I wrote down as free equals not caused by anything. I think that's the conclusion based on this thinking of what a free will would actually be. It cannot be undetermined, it cannot be determined, it cannot be random, it cannot be an external factor or an internal factor pushed out again and again would be continue to be an external factor. If it's either of those things, it's not free. Therefore, free has to be not caused by anything. If something is not caused by anything, it would be by definition random. And so, unless I'm missing something fundamental here, even the definition of free will in this argument is random. So the whole line of thinking breaks down. The thing that's more interesting to explore, I think more interesting, is that caused does not mean forced. I think that's the implied rationale on the determined path. There's some external factors, there's some quote unquote internal factors that are shaping a decision you make. But even though those are mechanisms to shape something, it doesn't mean that it actually is compelling that thing. Alex, I would think very much would say he's using his rational faculties, his reason, his educational background, his experience, having dialogue or debates with all kinds of people. Those are all different influential things that are causing, indeed, actually helped cause him to, in this discussion, launch into this debate or this argument against free will based on these laws of logic. Those were all causes of him to make that decision, but I don't think it follows that because something is a cause, that it in fact is a compulsion, or it's a forced thing. So I loved it. I love the discussion between these two guys. I thought it was very cordial and helpful, and looking forward to the next one.